this video I'm going to add two new classes. One of them is called Utility and one of them is called Lists. Now they have jobs to do, they're factory classes and they're going to add functionality into our application. So it's important that we have this there so that we can use it when we need it. As I've said so often before, there's quite often an issue of precedence in terms of what you program into the application and the order you put them in. So what I'm going to do without any further ado is I'm just going to start to create the classes. And I won't actually make you watch this, or say I'll speed it up when I do actually make the video. So I've pasted the code in. So let's just look at this line by line. Okay, the first method that we've got is actually not an arithmetic method, but the others are. So let's go through it. The method is called string found and it returns true or false, and it's a static method, meaning that it stays in memory and we don't have to recreate it every time we want to use it. And it takes parameters. It takes a list of strings to search and it gives a string which we're trying to find. And it's very simple. We set up a control variable here, which is the one we're going to return when we've done all the checking. And then we loop through the list in using a for each construct, and we try to find it. And if we find it, we just return the method. And that's what we do. And if it's not, it'll still be false from when we set it up here, and it'll return false in that line there. So we've given it an outcome in both directions, true and false. Now this one's quite interesting. This is where we calculate an activity and what we're doing is just returning a value, and it's very, very straightforward. So I think you should just follow on here. It's a float that's going to be returned. It's called calculate activity rate. It's a static function and we are taking parameters of a string name of a machine, a level and a duration. And the implementation of this is not complete yet, but the stub is here and we've got a temporary return value just to make the Visual Studio stop complaining. We'll do something with that later, I would hope. I'm still thinking about whether there's a nicer way to do it, but I may well use this later and it's there if I need to implement it. So the next one is to calculate minutes as a fraction of an hour, because remember our rates are hourly and we want a fraction that we can use to multiply them, the rate to get the fraction of an hour so that we can get the charging rate right. So it's called minutes fraction of hour. It takes minutes as a parameter and it returns a double, which is a number with a decimal point, and it's static once again, so it's staying in memory and available for our use. So we simply return minutes divided by 60, and that'll give us the fraction of an hour represented by the minutes that we got. So that's that one. And then last we've got hours and minutes, and that takes a number of minutes and returns it as a string saying 1 hour and 20 minutes. So if it got 80 minutes in, it would return 1 hour and 20 minutes. So here we go. So we've got a var set up as a temp string, just a handling string. So what this does is it takes the minutes and gives us the modulus of 60. So when the minutes is divided by 60, whatever is left over is going to be returned as the number of minutes. So for example, if there are 80 minutes, divide by 60, the remainder would be 20 minutes. Then we get 1 full hour and 20 left over. And then we just calculate the number of complete hours in that minutes that we were given. Then we join them all together as a useful string. So the next class I'm going to add is called Lists. So I've set it up. I've done all the stuff up here at the top. Now I know that this is going to have to access the database, and I know that we're going to have to work with a data table. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the right sort of directive in here. Because if I don't do that, we'll get all sorts of errors throwing up when it doesn't know what you're talking about in terms of the code that we try to implement. So I've got it on my clipboard. and here are all our lists. And I'm going to go through these one by one yet again so that you understand what's happening. So I'll just collapse this code a little bit so that it doesn't get too unwieldy to look at. So what we've got here is we've got an internal static string called data path. Now this is where you would have to alter your path to the place where your gym data text is. So that's where you've got to make sure you get right. Excuse me. So several things in this definition. We're going to get a string value. It's static in memory and it's internal, meaning that it's going to be used only in this particular class. So that's what we've got there. So here's the first one of our methods, which gets a list of machines. So this is where we've done things before. So we're going to have a list of strings which will represent all of the machine names that it finds in the list in the text file. So here's our path, there's our temp list, that's going to be our handling, and then there's our new data table that we're going to use to collect the data as we get it out of the text file. And then we reference the one we created earlier and said data table equals import data, get text file data, and the path that we give it. So we're going to use what's called a try catch block in this, and that's what it's supposed to do for catching errors. And the errors will be contained within here and thrown out by our catch. So it's really very straightforward. For each row in our data table, which we've imported from the text file and turned into a data table, we're going to read each line in the data table, and we're going to have a new class called line data that will put the values we find. So line data is going to be of type machine data that we created in the last video, and the machine name is going to be in column 1 and the level is going to be in column 2. So that's really easy. So what we do is that we then go on to excuse me, if we find the string name, and remember in the utility class we just did this, if we find if we don't find the name in the list we've already got, we'll add it again. So we're only adding unique names. So that's what we do with each one of these, and that gives us a list of unique machine names, 6 in our case, I think, isn't it, that are in the text file. So that's the way of saying we get the whole list out of the text file because it's easier to sort it that way, and then just take another list and add only the unique values that we find. So that's very straightforward, and that's where the error is thrown if we find one, and then having established what's in the list, we throw that list as a return, and we return that list to the user. Right, here's the next one. It's levels, and it's exactly the same. We do exactly the same thing. We're looking for the unique types of levels, and if you remember in ours it's morning, afternoon and evening, I think. So in the real assignment it's going to be low, medium and high, I think, but we end up with the whole searching of the whole of the text file and only returning the unique values in this temp list so that we can populate combo boxes, in fact, or lists of items on the interface. So that's the two methods that are inside this particular class, and they're really, really useful. And these are quite useful techniques to know about, so that if you've got a very large item list, you can separate the unique values so that you've only got the unique values to work with. In the next video, we'll use these classes in another class which references the database, and that's what we'll do next.